Market Journal, television for agricultural business decisions, is a presentation of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine.
Hello everyone, I'm Bryce Duskett, and thanks for joining us today on Market Journal. If you couldn't tell by the Arctic air, January is here. As we're now into 2022, we certainly hope you're having a great start to the new year. As we start things off today, pesticide application certifications must be renewed every 3 years. Consequently, you may have or you may soon receive a letter from the Nebraska Department of Agriculture if your pesticide applicator's license is set to expire this year. If you happen to find yourself in this position, the University of Nebraska has your solution. Since pesticides are characterized as restricted use depending on their level of toxicity, any person who applies or supervises the application of these special use pesticides is required by federal law to gain certification before making the use of these products. One big reason recertification is necessary so often is the speed at which the science changes on these compounds.
This is necessary because, new pesticides may have been introduced, and there may also be change in product labels of existing products. And also, when a pesticide is registered, it's based on the science at the time. If the current science finds that these pesticides are more harmful than originally perceived or thought, the EPA will consider that new science and put restriction on those. So there are, some changes between when you were certified first and when you have to be recertified. So that's why people have to come back again.
Besides avoiding federal penalties, being compliant on new training could greatly reduce the risk of harm you could cause to the environment, your family, or yourself.
Well, now the reason why, we give this training is mainly for safety reasons. As I have stated earlier, these restricted use pesticides are highly toxic, and if not handled properly, the safety of the applicator, his or her family, as well as the environment will be jeopardized. So these trainings help ensure that these restricted use pesticides are applied safely and effectively. So as I've said, they are required by law. So individuals apply pesticide without a license, but there are penalties for violating those rules. And the penalties are severe for repeat offenders and also based on how serious the violation is. More importantly, people who do not have the training may cause harm to themselves, their family, as well as the environment through improper application. So these are the ramifications.
There are a number of private pesticide training sessions available as we begin 2022. Coming up this month, there will be a session January 11th in Hyannis, Nebraska at 1 p.m. at the Grant County Courthouse. Then January 20th in Sidney, Nebraska, beginning at 8:30 in the morning at the Cheyenne County Community Center. There will be two separate events on the 25th. The first at 1 p.m. in Brewster, and the second also 1 p.m. in Chapel. Then finally in January in Scottsbluff on the 27th at 1 p.m. at the Panhandle Research and Extension Center. There is a $50 cost associated with the registration for these training sessions. If you have any questions about the training opportunities, you're encouraged to reach out to your local extension office. We've also posted some helpful links to the Market Journal website. Turning our attention to the grain complex now, the nearby corn contracts have broken $6 per bushel. Meanwhile, at the time of this recording, the nearby soybean contracts continue to inch closer to surpassing $14 per bushel. To break down the markets, this week we were joined on Wednesday by Darin Fessler of Lakefront Futures and Options. We began the conversation by asking Darin about the factors that will keep the momentum going for the corn market.
I think it's one, chart structure. I think that is the real big key. As long as the chart structure remains bullish here and we don't see a whole lot of breakdown there, I do think that this market could potentially, backed by momentum from the fund buying, could push this towards that 630, 640 on the corn, and probably maybe towards that 1430, 1440 level on the beans as well. But again, it's going to have to be led by chart structure. You have a huge WASDE report on next week coming up. That could move the needle. Obviously, the South American weather is going to have a big factor in all of this too. But we are at some levels now where producers are starting to step in here, reward this with a historically strong basis, and I think that's exactly what they need to do, and still be defensive, but still be optimistic here. We could push higher here because there is fun rebalancing this time of year.
Earlier this week, March soybeans posted their high since, I believe, July of this past year. Is it all South American weather at this point driving that market?
I don't think it's 100%. Obviously, there is issues in southern Brazil. Paraná and Rio Grande do Sul are very dry, but not all of those states are dry. We shift to January and February. We're going to shift some of that weather focus to Argentina, but Argentina is still not 100% planted. So again, I think that some of this is momentum driven by funds rebalancing, or index funds, even that for that matter as well. But to me, these are still opportunities for producers who have old crop. If you've missed out on these, the runs we had earlier in 21 in the summer, in the June-May timeframe, you still have an opportunity to sell it here. You still have very good basis levels. And to me, the way I'm looking at Brazil, I still think they're 140 million metric ton crop, which would be a record for Brazil. There's no indication as of right now. I know there are some private estimates out there that really slash their production figures, but to me, it's awfully early to say Brazil's not going to have a record. They have almost 3.5 million more acres planted. So to me, the way that the central and northern parts of Brazil are looking right now are going to be phenomenal. It's how much of that gets offset by the production losses that are coming from the south. I think that's a huge question for the bean market.
Been a lot of chatter about South America weather. I follow you on Twitter and you post a lot of pictures from there. What's the best way for a producer to try to keep up with everything that's coming out of there?
Yeah, I think is to take a holistic approach and listen to both sides, because there's going to be producers down there that are really hurting, and unlike the American producer, there's not a whole lot of crop insurance stuff that helps them out, so they are hurting. And I feel, if you're sitting out there and you're harvesting early beans and you only have 10, 15 bushel, per acre, that's going to be a whole different ball game, because there's some early stuff coming out of Mato Grosso that's 60, 65 bushel. But you got to take the holistic approach when you're looking at South America and figure out where the biggest parts of the country production-wise are, and determine it, where are they going? Where has the rain been? And right now, I think that the northern and the central part of Brazil are totally fine. I think the area of concern is starting to shift towards Argentina, because the maps, yes, the nearbys are dry, the extendeds are showing more rain. If Argentina gets rain, I still think South America is fine.
Let's shift the conversation a little bit. Let's talk about wheat. Certainly some volatility in that market lately. What's driving that?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of things going on. We have some of the higher wheat prices in the world. We do have, obviously, some concerns in the winter wheat belt here. I mean, you look at the Kansas wheat ratings that have come down. It kind of is maybe an error to the side of caution right now, because if you've been bearish this market, which there's been a lot of people bearish now, technically it's been a lot of chart damage done, but you look at the Kansas wheat ratings and you think about what the drought map looks like and how dry some of these areas have been, you kind of want to maybe just take a pause here a little bit, maybe take some profit, move to the sidelines, see how the progress goes over the next couple of months. And as long as wheat is starting to stabilize, say on the Chicago, right around this 750, 760 level, if we can stabilize there and see some pressure, upward pressure, or good pressure on the corn side, I think wheat goes with it. But if we start to see wheat start to falter again and corn goes, I think it's all going to go with it, along with beans. If beans go, I think it's a ride lower for all of the grains.
At least at the current moment, it seems like a pretty good opportunity, though, for producers out there that want to move some grain, right?
Definitely. You're seeing really strong historically basis. In some bases, is starting to weaken a little bit, but historically, it's still pretty good. We still need to reward these markets. If you want to see what happens later out into the May, the June, summer time frame, there's not a whole lot of carry in the market. Be defensive. Look for some put strategies in there, some put spreads, just to give yourself some downside insurance protection.
Building on that, final word is yours. What final risk management or market advice would you like to leave our viewers with today?
Don't leave a good profit. Take it while you get it. With the basis the way it is, with the spreads how they are, it's not paying a producer right now to hold corn out, say, out to July. If you're wanting to hold physical bushels, I would recommend selling physical, buying a call spreads out to the July-September timeframe, keeping yourself flexible in this market.
Thanks to Darin for taking the time to join us in studio this week. Next week, we'll be joined once again by Heartland Farm Partners President Jeff Peterson to discuss the grain markets. If you have a question you'd like for us to ask, feel free to get in touch with us via social media or email, and we'll be sure to pass your question along. Turning over to the livestock markets now, on Monday, President Joe Biden and Agriculture Secretary Tom Vilsack met virtually with some farmers and ranchers to announce a meat supply chain action plan. This plan includes 4 core strategies for creating a more competitive, fair, resilient meat and poultry sector. To break down some of the specifics of the announcement, we visited with UNL livestock economist Elliott Dennis. Elliott began by detailing this action plan.
Yeah, so the biggest thing that I got out of that was there's a lot of funding, grant opportunities, and innovative funding that's going to be coming down the pipeline. I think they laid out specific dollar amounts that really went through, and really this is to try to address some of the concerns about workforce development, availability of small and very small processing facilities, and just to try to develop or convert existing processing facilities to federally inspected. And so there's lots of different dollars amounts that are specific to different types of those, but most of this stuff is going to come online in spring and summer of 2022. The University of Nebraska has already done a couple webinars on what some of those types of funding are. This spring we're going to do another one, so just if you want to look for those, cap.unl.edu is where that information's already there, and we'll make sure to keep people aware of the types of fundings and those deadlines and how we can do to help.
Something else that came through during that press conference was the fact that they're planning to do a little bit tighter enforcement of the Packers and Stockyards Act. What do you think we could see different here in the new year in 2022? Maybe some changes coming from USDA on that side? Yeah,
so there's really 3 things that the Packers and Stockyards Act is going to be doing. And the first is that they're going to just provide clarity on that rule. And the second is that they're going to get rid of this kind of tournament style poultry production kind of system. And then third, they're just going to try to remove the claim that you have to show harm in order to bring a claim to the Packers and Stockyards. That last one probably has the biggest implication for the beef processing industry in general, because you used to have to be able to show that there was actual harm, and now you can actually submit a claim. The USDA also came out with this new portal, or will be coming out with the new portal that you can actually go ahead and submit those claims. So I think it just produces a bit more opportunity to bring those claims together.
Obviously, a lot of things that came out during that Monday event. Something that didn't quite get the press attention that surprised me had to do with tightening up the title product of the USA when it comes to marketing. This is separate from cool country of origin labeling. But what did you see in terms of product of the USA labeling? What are they going to do on that front?
Yeah, so there's a couple things. This is primarily geared towards people who are marketing products, and it's really trying to reduce the fraudulent labels of what the product of the USA actually is. And I think there's 3 things that they specifically addressed. First was that in order for it to be the product of USA, it had to be final assembly or processing of the product. All that significant processing has to be done within the U.S., and all virtual ingredients have to be from the U.S. And so I was also a little bit surprised that didn't get as much, because there's been a lot of claims out there saying that there's kind of misrepresentation on what the product actually is, and consumers are potentially paying premiums for products that they think were produced in the U.S. but maybe are imported and processed. And so really all that did was codify a lot of that for the Federal Trade Commission, and also provides a civil penalty for people who actually fraudulently make those claims that they're delivering product to the USA when in fact they're not.
So that was all happening in Washington, D.C. on Monday. Let's go to the other side of the country in terms of California. Prop 12 was passed back in 2018, finally came into effect here as we enter the new year. That has to do with a number of different animals, but it seems like pork has gotten a lot of the attention on that side. Give us the background of what is Prop 12 and how could that impact the industry?
Yeah, so Prop 12 was really passed back in 2018. It's gone, as you mentioned, pork has been kind of the highlighter of it because they're the ones who have been kind of fighting it in the court. And justifiably so. It has to do with gestation crates of pork production and the number of, and the spacing of in certain production facilities. And California is a large consumer of pork. They don't do hardly any pork production, and so they import a lot of that. And so it kind of was getting some of this commerce clause is kind of what was being argumented about whether you can enforce regulations on a certain part of the industry, even though they're shipping to another. That ultimately got struck down. Whether that's going to be heard by the Supreme Court and whether that Commerce Clause is going to be held valid kind of remains to be seen. I think Prop 12 just gives an idea of what's kind of happening within the industry at large and how consumers can really drive the agenda for what we're able to do in commercial agriculture. In the hog and beef industry, regulation on antibiotic uses is one of those classic examples how people are concerned about the use of antibiotics and hormones in food production and how the government potentially responds to some of those concerns.
Well, let's get some of your final thoughts here quick, Elliott. What else in the cattle industry has caught your eye lately?
Yes, there's a lot of talk about downward pressure on price, and a lot of that had to do, especially in the feedlot, a lot of that had to do with packer leverage and the number of cattle and COVID and lots of issues. And I think one of the bright things that we saw in this last cattle on feed report was that placements were still strong, but also marketings were strong. And really what that's setting us up to in April and May to be pretty strong pricing, particularly here in Nebraska where we place heavy cattle.
Jouranl livestock economist Elliott Dennis joining us. Elliott, always good to see you. Thanks for your thoughts.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Again, our thanks to both of this week's market analysts. It's always a pleasure to get their take on the markets. Well, farmers and ranchers serve their communities in many different ways. Dave Welsh is a longtime organic farmer who has served his community as a member of the school board for about 30 years now. First, he served on the school board of the rural Class 1 school in Saline County, and for nearly 20 years, he's been president of the school board at Milford Public Schools. Welsh brings farmer values to the board, working toward offering the highest quality education possible for district students, but also working hard to maintain fiscal responsibility. You can learn more about Welsh and his work being done with the school board in the January issue of the Nebraska Farmer. It is now time for weather with Nebraska Extension Ag climatologist and Market Journal Chief Meteorologist Al Dutcher. Well, Al, we've seen some snow accumulation across most of the state over the past couple of weeks. How are things shaping up in the weeks ahead?
Well, Bryce, we've seen a fairly snowy pattern across the western one-third of the United States with those upper air lows coming out of the Gulf of Alaska into the western United States, and Nebraska shared in some of that snowfall, although not as much as was initially anticipated for the storm that came in New Year's Eve. But this second storm that hit the southwestern portion of the state in the southern panhandle Wednesday through Thursday morning dropped anywhere from 3 upwards to 9 inches reported in the very extreme southwestern corner of the state. So first decent, real significant snow moisture event for that portion of the state that we've seen this winter. We've seen a lot much colder air to the north of us, and I wish I could show you the latest model runs for this upcoming week, but our data provider was having some issues in terms of delivering that package to us, so we don't have the graphics available. I will say that from a perspective of looking at the models on different various sites, it looks like we're going to be basically dry for this next week, with the coldest air coming in as we go into Sunday, and then potentially as we get into late next week, we'll start to see another cool down, although it does not at this time appear to be Arctic in nature, although it will bring us back to more normal temperatures. So enjoy this brief warm up. Maybe this is our January thaw. I expect as we go to the end of the month, we're going to see once again more active weather develop in the western United States, which will eventually transfer in to the central part of the United States in the form of probably snow, maybe if we're lucky, a little bit of rain. So let's take a look at what we might see in regards to the remainder of this month, and what we might see as we go into the spring. So from a perspective of what we've seen the last 2 weeks in our absence, we've had good moisture in the eastern Corn Belt, excellent moisture in the western United States. In fact, we're seeing snow levels in the Sierra region just to the west of Tahoe that are running right now close to the second highest snow total for this point of the season in historical precedence. It'll probably drop a little bit when we get these dry conditions, but if we get a couple more atmospheric river events, we're probably looking at a very significant runoff potential for this region come this spring. In terms of temperatures, of course, the Arctic air has been bottled up to the north of the border. It's starting to make its way southward. The most dominant feature is the very cold temperatures across Montana and North Dakota. We've been kind of sharing the warmth and the cold, so we're right here within the average range in the warmer conditions to our south and east. As we look at the forecast that was updated New Year's Day from CPC, we're seeing an extension of the below normal temperatures and a southern drift of those. So there's very strong possibility that what we've seen for Arctic air already will likely reemerge once we get some storm activity coming into the west coast and able to tap that Arctic air that resides up into the Yukon territory. In terms of precipitation, very aggressive moisture pattern for the eastern Corn Belt is still projected. If this occurs, we are going to see some issues when it comes time for planting season, and above normal moisture over the northern Rockies. This may be very good news for those areas downstream, particularly as we get into the early summer period. In terms of temperatures, we're still seeing very warm temperatures across the southern United States, and we're seeing a shrinkage of the below normal temperatures to our northwest, which would signify to me that probably March will be the coldest and we'll start to see a warmer trend. So overall, looks to me like we're going to see more of a normal winter with a little bit more cold coming in the earlier part of the winter, as I've said before, compared to last winter. So those of you like that cold weather, enjoy it. It's going to be back real soon.
Thanks, Al. Next up, as we get deeper into the winter months, now might be a good time to start thinking about Yucca Control. Market Journal's Mike Straub recently sat down with Nebraska Extension Range and Forage Specialist Jerry Valesky to learn more about the process.
Yucca plants are common in our area, and if not taken care of in a timely manner, they will reduce overall grass production in your pastures.
Yucca plants, or sometimes people call them soapweed, they're a pretty common plant in central and western Nebraska, particularly some of the drier rangeland sites, and really on several different types of soil too, whether it's sandy or our heavier soils. But the yucca plants, they're a native plant, but once they get established, they can form, some patches in our pastures, and they're very undesirable in terms of the situation they cause, where they'll basically displace the grass, and then that in turn, of course, reduces your overall grass production in a pasture.
Knowing how the yucca plant spreads is the first line of defense when trying to prevent its growth in your pastures.
Yucca plants, they do primarily spread by underground stems, or rhizomes, we call them. So you'll have a parent plant, and from that main parent plant, you'll have smaller seedlings, if you will, or young plants that initiate growth from that parent plant through an underground stem or underground rhizome. And that's their primary method of spreading. Occasionally, of course, they do flower and produce seeds, and so you may have a new plant starting from the seed, but that's probably not too common.
Using herbicides can become a very expensive process. One way to help combat the yucca plant is by having cows that can graze the weed.
There's a number of different herbicides, of course, can be used to control yucca plants. However, to do a general broadcast application of a herbicide can become really expensive or almost cost prohibitive. And so if people are using herbicides, they'll generally take the approach of spot spraying individual plants or just spraying these small patchy areas. However, in some cases, we have some cows that are able to graze those yucca plants during the wintertime. And this is kind of a learned behavior by not all the cows that you might have in your herd, but generally some of the older, more experienced cows, where they can have figured out basically how to kind of push those yucca plants over and graze away at the base of the plants, particularly during the wintertime. And that, of course, would cause damage to the plant and reduce the number of actively growing plants that you have out there.
Not every cow has learned to graze yucca. Bringing in an experienced cow to help teach this behavior might be a way to help the process.
Not every cow will be able to figure that process out of how to graze a yucca plant with those, real spiny leaves. But it has been observed that some cows will get it figured out, like I said, and be able to graze those. And it actually has been practiced where there was an individual who had some property or some pasture that did have quite a bit of yucca on it. And he actually worked with a friend of his and brought in some cows that were adapted to grazing the yucca plants. And they did do, a little bit of damage, a little bit of control when they brought him in for some winter grazing on his, basically it was a yucca infested pasture.
Common herbicides can be helpful in the fight against yucca. However, they are mainly used in spot treatments only. When
it comes to the herbicides, some things like, and these are commonly available pasture herbicides, but Tordon, Remedy, Velpar, or Cimarron Plus. And again, this would be mostly in a individual plant or a spot spraying. And it does take fairly heavy dose of some of these individual herbicides, but when you're doing it on a spot basis, the cost can be relatively inexpensive. And after those yucca plants are dead, of course, it's still going to take some time for them to decompose. So they're going to be out there and looking ugly for a few years until they finally disappear.
If you have an issue with yucca in your pastures, treating it right away will help grass production over time. Grazing cattle and common herbicides are two defenses against this plant. Reporting for Market Journal, I'm Mike Straub.
If you'd like more information about controlling yucca plants on your land, you can find more on the topic at cropwatch.unl.edu. We've also taken the liberty of posting a helpful link to the Market Journal website. That's going to do it for this week's show. Remember, if you missed a story, you can download the Market Journal mobile app or follow us on social media to join the conversation. Next week, we'll take a closer look at the Winter Wheat Works Initiative and get some insights from Mary Dranowski on grazing cover crops. We hope to see you back right here then. Until then, I'm Bryce Duskett. Thanks for watching.
Join Market Journal online at marketjournal.unl.edu. You can also follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine. Market Journal is produced by the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources.